In the quiet corridors of Windsor Castle, where centuries of royal tradition hang heavy in the air, a single portrait has sparked a quiet but seismic shift in the heart of the British monarchy. It is not a new scandal of headlines or a public confrontation on the palace steps. Instead, it is the carefully orchestrated return of Princess Diana's official image to a place of honor known as the Hall of Matriarchs, a move planned with such meticulous legal and institutional precision that it caught Queen Camilla completely off guard. What followed was a power struggle conducted largely in silence, with King Charles offering no public word of opposition, and a blunt private exchange that left little room for doubt about whose legacy still commands the deepest loyalty within the family. Before we go any further into this unfolding story, if you value thoughtful coverage of the royal family that digs beneath the surface, take a moment to subscribe. It helps us keep bringing these narratives to you. The reinstallation itself did not arrive as a spontaneous gesture of remembrance. According to the accounts that have emerged, Prince William and Princess Anne worked in concert, navigating the formal channels and protocols that govern even the most symbolic acts inside the royal residences. Their planning was deliberate. Every detail of placement, timing, and institutional approval appears to have been arranged so that the portrait's return would stand on firm ground, legal, historical, and ceremonial. When the moment finally came, the surprise registered most sharply with Queen Camilla. The Hall of Matriarchs is not a casual gallery. It is a space that carries the weight of lineage and continuity, a visual statement about which women of the family are granted enduring recognition. To place Diana's portrait there after years of absence was to assert, without a single spoken word in public, that her place among them had never truly been erased. King Charles's silence in the face of this development has been noted as particularly telling. In a family where even small adjustments to protocol can signal deeper currents of authority, the absence of any recorded objection from the monarch himself has been interpreted by those following the matter as a form of quiet acceptance. The restoration of Diana's legacy, long a sensitive subject within the institution, was allowed to proceed. That acceptance did not come without friction. The story reaches a sharper edge in a private confrontation that followed. Princess Anne, known for her direct manner and her long experience inside the royal machine, is reported to have spoken to Queen Camilla with unmistakable clarity. The placement of the portrait, she stated, was simply what Diana deserved. There was no elaborate justification offered in that moment, no diplomatic softening of the edges, only the assertion that the recognition was overdue and rightful. This exchange, blunt as it was, sits at the center of a larger pattern. The reinstallation is presented not as an isolated act of nostalgia, but as one visible marker in an ongoing effort to elevate Diana's memory and influence within the institution itself. For years, the question of how, and whether, her presence should be formally acknowledged has lingered in the background of royal life. Portraits, after all, are never merely decoration in a place like Windsor. They are statements of continuity, of which stories the family chooses to keep in full view and which ones it allows to recede. By returning Diana's image to the Hall of Matriarchs, William and Anne appear to have drawn a deliberate line. Her role as a matriarch of the modern royal story would no longer remain in the shadows. Yet the very carefulness of the planning raises its own questions. Why now? Why coordinate so thoroughly across legal and institutional channels if the decision were purely personal or sentimental? The answer, according to the framing of these events, lies in the symbolic weight such a gesture carries. Small acts inside the monarchy often echo far beyond the rooms in which they occur. A portrait's return can become a referendum on memory, on loyalty, and on the quiet recalibration of power among those who remain. Camilla's surprise suggests that the move was not a collective family consensus arrived at in open discussion. Charles's silence suggests that whatever private reservations may have existed, they were not strong enough, or not voiced strongly enough to halt the process. Anne's words to Camilla crystallize the underlying claim that Diana's place was earned, and that the institution itself was finally prepared to acknowledge it in a space reserved for the women who shaped the line. The Hall of Matriarchs becomes, in this telling, more than architecture. It is a stage on which competing visions of the family's past and future are being negotiated without the glare of cameras or the language of press releases. William's involvement carries particular resonance. As the heir and as Diana's son, his participation in the orchestration links the personal to the institutional. Anne's role, as a senior working royal with deep knowledge of protocol and precedent, lends the effort the authority of long service. Together, they appear to have navigated the system from within rather than challenging it from outside. The result is a restoration that stands not as rebellion but as a carefully executed correction, one that the monarch, by remaining silent, has effectively permitted to stand. What makes the episode compelling is precisely this layering of the personal and the structural. A mother's portrait returned to a hall of honor, a stepmother caught unprepared, a king who chooses not to speak, a princess who states without ornament that the recognition was deserved. Each element is simple on its surface. Taken together, they form a narrative of quiet insistence, that Diana's influence continues to shape the institution long after her death, and that certain members of the family are prepared to act on that conviction with patience and precision. The power struggle that followed was not conducted through leaks or public statements, but through the placement of an image and the refusal to reverse it. In a monarchy built on symbolism, that may be the most effective form of assertion available. As the portrait now hangs in its restored place, the questions it raises remain open. How far does this elevation of Diana's memory extend? What other quiet recalibrations may follow? And what does it mean for the future balance of voices inside the family when such a significant symbolic act can proceed under the cover of institutional process and royal silence? Those are the threads that continue to unfold from this single, carefully planned restoration. The story does not end with the hanging of a picture. It begins there, with the recognition that even in the most traditional of institutions, the past is never entirely settled, and the act of remembering can itself become an exercise of power. The full implications of this moment are still coming into focus, and the private conversations that surrounded it may yet reveal more about the currents moving beneath the surface of royal life. The silence that followed the portrait's return was not empty. In the days and weeks after Diana's image took its place once more in the Hall of Matriarchs, the absence of any formal statement from King Charles became its own form of communication. Within the closed world of royal residences, silence can carry more weight than words. By neither endorsing the reinstallation in public nor moving to reverse it, the monarch effectively allowed the restoration of Diana's legacy to stand. That quiet acceptance transformed what might have remained a private family arrangement into something larger, an institutional signal that the long process of reclaiming Diana's place had reached a new stage. Yet acceptance did not erase the friction. The surprise that registered with Queen Camilla was not merely personal. It pointed to a deeper tension over who holds the authority to shape the visual and ceremonial memory of the family. The Hall of Matriarchs is a space that embodies continuity. To decide which women belong there is to decide which stories the institution chooses to keep visible across generations. When William and Anne moved with such careful coordination to return Diana's portrait, they were not simply hanging a painting. They were asserting a claim about her enduring status as a matriarch whose influence still matters. Camilla's unexpected encounter with that claim revealed how differently the various members of the family may still understand the boundaries of that status. The private confrontation that followed sharpened the point. Princess Anne's words to Camilla were direct and unadorned. The placement was simply what Diana deserved. There is a particular force in that phrasing. It does not invite negotiation. It does not soften the assertion with ceremony or precedent. It states a moral and institutional fact as Anne saw it. In a family where language is often carefully measured, such bluntness stands out. It suggests that the effort to elevate Diana's memory had moved beyond quiet advocacy into a moment of clear insistence. Anne, with her decades of experience navigating the protocols and expectations of royal life, chose to speak without the usual layers of diplomatic distance. The message was unmistakable. The portrait's return was not a favor or a concession. It was recognition long overdue. This exchange sits inside a broader pattern of quiet determination. The reinstallation did not appear as a sudden decision. It was the product of meticulous legal and institutional planning, steps taken to ensure that the act would rest on solid ground rather than personal sentiment alone. That level of preparation implies an awareness that any restoration of Diana's image would touch sensitive nerves. By working through the proper channels, William and Anne appear to have sought to make the decision difficult to unwind. Once the portrait was in place and the institutional steps completed, revering it would have required a different kind of intervention, one that Charles, by remaining silent, chose not to pursue. The symbolic weight of the Hall of Matriarchs makes the entire episode more than a family matter. In royal residences, portraits function as living statements of lineage and legitimacy. They tell visitors, staff, and successive generations which figures the institution continues to honor. For years, Diana's official presence in such spaces had remained limited or contested. Her absence was itself a form of statement. To reverse that absence with deliberate care is to revise the statement. It suggests that the institution is prepared, at least in this visible form, to integrate her memory more fully into its own narrative of continuity. William's involvement carries particular significance here. As both her son and the future king, his participation links the personal claim of a child to the institutional claim of the heir. Anne's participation links that claim to the authority of a senior working royal who has long understood how power operates inside the system. What remains striking is the contrast between the careful external planning and the internal surprise it produced. The process was thorough enough to succeed. It was discreet enough that Camilla was not prepared for the result. That combination points to a calculated approach. Move through the structures that govern royal property and protocol, complete the act, and allow the silence of the monarch to confirm it. The power struggle that followed was therefore not a public battle of statements and leaks. It was a quieter contest over the right to define the family's visual memory and the willingness of the central figure, Charles, to intervene or to stand aside. In this light, the reinstallation becomes a turning point, not because it resolved every question surrounding Diana's place, but because it demonstrated that certain members of the family were prepared to act decisively on her behalf, and to do so from within the institution itself. The blunt private conversation between Anne and Camilla marked the moment when that determination was voiced without disguise. The silence of the king marked the moment when the institution, at its highest level, declined to push back. Together, those two responses, direct speech and strategic quiet, allowed the portrait to remain. The larger effort to elevate Diana's memory continues beyond any single act. The Hall of Matriarchs is one space among many where the family's story is told in images and arrangements. Whether this restoration signals further changes in how her influence is acknowledged remains an open question. What is clear from the events themselves is that the process is no longer passive. It is being shaped by deliberate choices, careful planning, and a willingness to confront the discomfort those choices may cause. In a monarchy that has long managed its internal tensions through protocol and restraint, the return of a single portrait has revealed how much symbolic power still resides in the simple act of deciding who belongs on the wall. The story does not rest solely on the hanging of the image. It rests on the recognition that memory inside the royal family is never fixed, and that the effort to restore Diana's place is being pursued with a combination of patience, precision, and occasional bluntness that leaves little room for ambiguity. As the portrait now occupies its restored position, the currents it set in motion continue to move beneath the surface of royal life, shaping conversations and calculations that the public may never fully see. The portrait now hangs where it was meant to hang, and the quiet that surrounds it is no longer the quiet of absence. It is the quiet of a decision that has been allowed to stand. In the carefully measured world of the British monarchy, that difference matters. What began as a coordinated effort by Prince William and Princess Anne to restore Princess Diana's official image to the Hall of Matriarchs has become something more lasting than a single ceremonial act. It has become a visible marker of how the institution is choosing, at least in this instance, to remember her. The meticulous legal and institutional planning that made the reinstallation possible was never only about securing permission. It was about ensuring the decision could not be easily undone. By working through the channels that govern royal property and protocol, William and Anne created a result that rested on more than personal sentiment. Once the portrait was in place, revering it would have required an active intervention from the highest level. King Charles's notable silence supplied the opposite of that intervention. In the language of royal life, silence of that kind functions as consent. The restoration of Diana's legacy was permitted to proceed, and the power struggle that the move triggered was resolved not by public decree, but by the simple fact that the portrait remained. That resolution did not erase the underlying tension. Queen Camilla's surprise revealed how differently the various members of the family still experienced the question of Diana's place. The blunt private confrontation that followed made the difference unmistakable. When Princess Anne told Camilla that the placement was simply what Diana deserved, she was not offering a diplomatic suggestion. She was stating a claim about recognition and justice inside the institution itself. In a family that has long preferred measured language and carefully managed appearances, such directness carries its own force. It suggests that the effort to elevate Diana's memory has moved beyond quiet advocacy into a phase of clearer insistence. The Hall of Matriarchs gives that insistence a permanent physical form. Spaces like this one are never neutral. They are the architecture through which the monarchy tells successive generations which women belong to its official story of continuity. For years, Diana's official presence in such spaces had been limited. Her absence itself had become a kind of statement. To reverse that absence with careful planning and institutional authority is to revise the statement. It is to declare that her influence is no longer something the family prefers to keep at a distance. William's participation links the personal claim of a son to the institutional claim of the heir. Anne's participation links that claim to the authority of a senior royal who has spent a lifetime understanding how power moves inside the system. Together, they demonstrated that the restoration could be achieved from within rather than demanded from outside. What makes the episode a symbolic turning point is precisely this combination of method and outcome. The planning was thorough. The surprise was real. The private confrontation was blunt. The monarch's response was silence. Each element is modest on its own. Taken together, they form a narrative of quiet determination, that Diana's place among the matriarchs would no longer remain unsettled, and that certain members of the family were prepared to act on that conviction with patience and precision. In an institution built on symbolism, the return of a single portrait can carry the weight of a larger recalibration. It signals that memory itself remains contested ground, and that the contest is being conducted not only through words, but through the arrangement of images and the refusal to reverse them. The broader effort to elevate Diana's memory and influence continues beyond the walls of Windsor. The Hall of Matriarchs is one space among many where the family's story is told in visual form. Whether this restoration will be followed by further quiet adjustments remains an open question. What the events themselves make clear is that the process is no longer passive. It is being shaped by deliberate choices, by careful navigation of institutional channels, and by a willingness to confront the discomfort those choices may cause. The power struggle that accompanied the portrait's return was not resolved by victory speeches or public statements. It was resolved by the simple, enduring fact of the image remaining where it had been placed. In the end, the story returns to the same quiet corridors where it began. A portrait that had been absent is present again. A queen was caught unprepared. A princess spoke without ornament. A king chose not to speak at all. These are the elements that have been confirmed. Around them gather the larger questions that any monarchy must eventually face. How it chooses to remember the figures who shaped it, whose influence it is prepared to acknowledge in permanent form, and how the living members of the family negotiate the claims of the past against the realities of the present. The reinstallation of Diana's portrait does not answer every one of those questions. It does, however, demonstrate that the answers are still being written, and that they are being written by people willing to move with both care and conviction. What this moment ultimately means for the future of the royal family will depend on the choices that follow it. For now, the portrait hangs in the Hall of Matriarchs as a quiet assertion that some legacies refuse to remain in the shadows. Whether that assertion will deepen or remain a single, carefully protected act is a story still unfolding. I would love to know what you think about this development. Does the restoration of Diana's portrait feel like a meaningful shift, or simply a long overdue recognition? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to stay with these stories as they continue to develop, make sure you are subscribed. There is always more to understand about the quiet currents that shape the monarchy from within.